I couldn't remember the name of the redacted person, or I had some confusion as to the dates and how it all fitted together. That's my best recollection of where I was. So I phoned Peter O'Callaghan
for assistance to remember.
Yes.
Just on a point of accuracy, as I understand it from documents that I was given by those instructing you this morning, that if it's the same case you're referring to, that the plaintiff in the case was someone else, not the person who said that Father Gulen had walked in on Kevin O'Donnell and that person.
That's so. So it was Mr. Redacted, if I can call him that, Mr. Redacted, who I think I could not remember. Either I couldn't remember I couldn't remember the name of the redacted person, or I had some confusion as to the dates and how it all fitted together. That's my best recollection of where I was. So I phoned Peter O'Callaghan
for assistance to remember.
Yes.
Just on a point of accuracy, as I understand it from documents that I was given by those instructing you this morning, that the case you're referring to, that the plaintiff in the case was someone else, not the person who said that Father Gulen had walked in on Kevin O'Donnell and that person.
That's so. So it was Mr. Redacted, if I can call him that, Mr. Redacted, who had alleged that Gulen had walked in on O'Donnell, and in a separate proceeding which had been issued with a pseudonym, so I think I'm safe to pseudonym of ID, Mr. ID was, in the same way as the Fosters were seeking to do, Mr. ID was seeking to rely on the allegation that Father Gulen had witnessed O'Donnell abusing Mr. Redacted as evidence of prior knowledge.
And information that Mr. O'Callaghan was able to disclose to you assisted you to recollect the matters you've described?
Well, it appears from the diary note that is the case, yes.
And your statement dealing with this, you will recall, in its original form said that Mr. O'Callaghan advised you of matters
I think I could not remember.
Not previously
Either
been aware.
I couldn't remember.
And in correcting the statement at the commencement of your evidence,
I couldn't remember the name of the redacted person, or
you didn't recollect. In other words, didn't recollect at the time of the phone call.
That's so, and also didn't recollect at the time of making my statement.
Yes.
Yes. So, while I don't... I'm sorry, Your Honour. You finished? Oh, thank you, Your Honour. While I don't have any recollection of this conversation at all, what I can say is that from time to time I contact Mr. O'Callaghan seeking information from him, and that I'm mindful, very mindful of the fact that there's information that he has as independent commissioner that is confidential and that it's inappropriate for him to tell me, but also that there's information that he has from other sources that he can tell me. And as I think this entire discussion demonstrates, my memory is not as good as his. Mr. O'Callaghan, in my experience, has an excellent memory, and I knew also that Mr. O'Callaghan had studied in some detail the criminal prosecution of O'Donnell, as well as the criminal prosecution of other priests who had been prosecuted. So, in a context such as this, where I was acting as solicitor for the Archbishop and others, and I had a statement of claim in front of me that I was seeking to respond to, I would have...
but nevertheless, you are being called...
It have been incorrect. I think I could not remember. either I couldn't remember the name of the redacted person, or I had some confusion as to, and that I'm very mindful of the fact that there's information that he has as Independent Commissioner that is confidential and that it's inappropriate for him to tell me, but also that there's information that he has from other sources that he can tell me. And as I think this entire discussion demonstrates, my memory is not as good as his. Mr. O'Callaghan, in my experience, has an excellent memory, and I knew also that Mr. O'Callaghan had studied in some detail the criminal prosecution of O'Donnell, as well as the criminal prosecution of other priests who had been prosecuted. So, in a context such as this, where I was acting as solicitor for the Archbishop and others, and I had a statement of claim in front of me that I was seeking to respond to, I would have told Mr. O'Callaghan why I was ringing and the purpose for which I was asking him questions, and I would have asked him whether there was anything that he could tell me, or words to that effect.
Mr. Leader, you've been involved in this work for the Church for a long time.
Yes.
And we understand the work that you've done in a general sense. I presume that over that time you've had many discussions with archbishops, bishops, vicars general, priests and so on about paedophile activity within the Church.
Yes.
And in those discussions, I assume the topic of what the Church might have known or understood has been raised on many occasions.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Now, those outside the Church have some understanding of the way the Church operates and the way priests are accommodated, and no doubt meet on a regular basis with each other, both socially and for professional reasons. Would that be right?
I'm sure that's so, yes.
Well, have you not learnt of that in your discussions about the Church and the way it operates?
I think I have learnt of that, yes.
Yeah. Now, in the discussions that you've had when you first started this work, I assume you spoke with the Archbishop about paedophile activity within the Church?
I'm sure that I must have had some discussions. You're asking me about when I started, so you're asking me about Archbishop Little, and I'm sure that when I started I would have had a discussion or two with him, but at that time I was a relatively junior solicitor and I didn't have a lot of direct contact with Archbishop Little.
You're older and greyer now, but nevertheless you were being called in, as it were, with your firm to advise the Church in relation to this problem.
Well, my firm was there and I became involved, yes.
And the central issue is paedophilic activity within the Church, wasn't
Yes.
it? Now, you say you were involved in some discussions with Archbishop Little about the matter?
I'm sure that I was, yes.
Now, were you involved in discussions with him about what he might have known about paedophile activity within the Church?
I certainly was involved in those discussions in relation to O'Donnell.
What about others?
Undoubtedly, yes. Most likely in the context of other litigation. In other words, litigation in relation to priests other than O'Donnell.
What about apart from litigation, just as a general issue? Now it was emerging, public knowledge was coming along.
I don't believe that I had those discussions with Archbishop Little. As best as I can remember, I don't remember any general discussions with Archbishop Little.
What discussions did you have with Archbishop Little about Father O'Donnell?
In a proceeding which was neither the proceeding in a proceeding brought by a victim of O'Donnell, which was neither the proceeding brought by Mr. Redacted, if I can call him that, or by Mr. ID, but by someone else who issued proceedings under the pseudonym SP. The proceedings reached a point at which Archbishop Little was required to answer interrogatories, and I had various discussions with him in order to take instructions for the drafting of the answers to interrogatories. So I can point to that context quite specifically as an occasion where I did have detailed discussions with Archbishop Little.
And I assume the interrogatory was asking him, amongst other things, whether he knew.
When he knew. Yes.
What was his answer?
His answer was that he had no knowledge of any activity on behalf of O'Donnell until 1992.
And what did he know in 1992?
What he knew was the complaints brought forward by Mr. Redacted. In other words, in 1992, if I have all of these people right, certainly in 1992, a victim came forward to the then Vicar General, Monsignor Cudmore, complaining about O'Donnell.
And the Archbishop was told?
Yes.
What did the Archbishop do about it?
I'm sorry, Your Honour, I've said 1992, I need to correct myself, it's 1994. And at that time, O'Donnell was already retired.
So, your evidence is that it was in 1994 that the complaint came forward?
Yes, I think so. Certainly, I'm slightly hesitant as to dates, and I'd be grateful for the opportunity to refresh my memory on these matters, but certainly that Archbishop Little had no knowledge of any complaint by O'Donnell until after O'Donnell had retired. That was the central point of the interrogatory and the answer.
Right. Now, Archbishop Little retired in 1996?
Yes, in 1996.
One of his auxiliary or assistant bishops for some time had been, as he then was, Bishop Pell.
Yes.
And I assume you've had discussions with Bishop Pell about his knowledge of pedophile activity within the church, is that right?
I have.
And those discussions, did they start before he became the Archbishop?
They started after his appointment as Archbishop was announced. It's in late July 1996, but before he was formally appointed.
And
I had not known him I apologise, I had not known him at all as a bishop.
And I assume that you had discussions with him in relation to the Foster's allegations.
Yes.
Is that right? And as you know, as the Cardinal's knowledge of pedophile activity within the church during his time as Bishop and Archbishop in Melbourne.
Yes.
And did those discussions range to the general question of knowledge of pedophile activity within the Archdiocese?
Yes.
And can you recall those discussions now?
I can recall I don't recall specific discussions.
Can you recall the general content?
Yes.
And when did those discussions start?
In July 1996, when we were discussing what became the introduction of what became the Melbourne response.
And what did the Cardinal tell you as to his knowledge of pedophile activity within the Archdiocese?
The Cardinal was aware of prosecutions that had occurred, particularly by that time, of course, O'Donnell and Glennon and others. He was aware of that. He also told me, and I had some detailed discussions with him on these matters, that he had no knowledge of any other activity. He had no knowledge of activity that had not been acted on, but that it was his general impression that that had occurred within the church, and that one of the reasons for the establishment of the Melbourne response was to deal with that.
And in terms of his knowledge of what had happened, do you say that was confined to becoming aware of it when priests were prosecuted?
Yes, or that allegations became known somehow publicly. I have a clear recollection that what he told me was that he only knew about these allegations as they became public.
Yes, very well.
Thank you, Your Honour. Returning to the note that's on the screen, and I take it at the foot of the page where it's TT Kevin. You phoned Kevin Lyons, you advised him of what you'd learned. He said David Collins is looking at it all and that you would fax or email the details. Is that right?
Yes.
That's the sum of it, really.
Yes.
Right, if we look at tab 190. This is now, as I understand it, your promised fax with the details.
Yes. Sir, could we go back to the diary note?
Yes, of course. That's the previous tab.
What the diary note says is that someone walked in and Mr. Redacted was with Kevin O'Donnell, and the dash denied, I understand to be a reference to Father Gulen denying that the allegation that he had walked in on O'Donnell with a boy. And it goes on to say that after that, the Scoutmaster went to the cathedral. But in looking at this diary note, I can see that that is not consistent with my understanding of the chronology, because my understanding of the chronology is that the Scoutmaster went to the cathedral in 1958, and that it's in 1962 that Gulen allegedly witnessed O'Donnell with the boy. So I can't. What I wanted to say about that diary note is that I don't believe that that's recording anything that Mr. O'Callaghan told me, because the chronology doesn't make sense. I think most likely it's a reflection of the fact that in the statement of claim, the allegation about Gulen was said to have been in 1958, and that's not right, and I think because it was 1962, and that was what was in part confusing me.
Well, let's take a look at what you then advised counsel who were tasked with drafting defences in these actions, because that might clear it up to some degree.
Yes.
We can scroll down. So you say in the first paragraph you have a little further information on the sixth defendant, Father Gulen.
Yes.
And then you set it out, he is a priest and he is in good standing. The relevant allegation against him appears to be that, according to the police statement of an O'Donnell victim, and it's redacted in 1962, Gulen, would you understand that, was called by O'Donnell, I beg your pardon, the redacted person was called by O'Donnell into O'Donnell's bedroom. I'm going to get the unredacted one so I can be sure not to be misleading you, Mr. Leader. Yes, that's right. So, victim A, we might call him, was called by O'Donnell into O'Donnell's bedroom. O'Donnell was in bed and pulled back the covers. O'Donnell was wearing pyjamas, and he pulled that person A into the bed on top of him. The door opened and Father Gulen walked in. O'Donnell pushed A away. Gulen left. I'm informed of the aforegoing by Peter O'Callaghan.
Yes.
Right. And there's no indication there, of course, that you knew that information from any other source?
I did know that information from another source, and I know that positively because in the ID proceeding, as I said before, the same allegation had been made, not initially. What occurred was that Mr ID had issued his writ, and there were, over a significant number of months in 1998, various applications seeking leave to amend the statement of claim. And in support of the application to amend the statement of claim to include what I might call this 1962 Gulen allegation, Mr ID's solicitor swore an affidavit in support, and he exhibited to that affidavit the police statement of Mr Redacted.
Yes, and that's the one I referred to earlier. That's what I have, yes.
Yes, and I'm able to say that I had that police statement as a result of it having been exhibited to the affidavit in support, which was tendered in court, and so I had that police statement. I had clearly forgotten about that when I spoke with Mr O'Callaghan, and my best recollection is that my conversation with Mr O'Callaghan assisted me in sorting out the confusion about 1958 and 1962, and I suspect sorting out the confusion between the identity of Mr Redacted and Mr ID, and ultimately allowing me to go back to my file in relation to ID, find the affidavit in support and the police statement on it, and I can say with some confidence that I must have had the police statement in front of me when I drafted that fax, because the fax contains details that aren't recorded in my diary note with Mr O'Callaghan. And I believe in any event that I would not have prepared a fax to counsel giving instructions about those details without referring to some document.
And you go on to say that I have ascertained Gulen was the assistant parish priest to O'Donnell at the time.
I also say, sir, at the end of the paragraph that we were talking about, I'm informed of the foregoing by Peter O'Callaghan. And, Your Honour, I don't believe that I was informed of all of the matters in that paragraph by Mr O'Callaghan specifically. I believe that I must have been informed by Mr O'Callaghan that Gulen was a priest in good standing, and I believe that the source of my information for the rest of the paragraph was the police statement, which I already had, but which I had been unable to locate until Mr O'Callaghan was able to, as best as I recall, give me some information that allowed me to know which file to go and look for it on.
Well, this is your present reconstruction of what you think occurred at the time.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Because, firstly, you said Mr Callaghan has a very good memory.
Yes.
And that would include a memory for detail, I take it.
Yes.
And secondly, you wrote this fax very shortly after, in fact, as I understand it, the very same day that you spoke to Mr O'Callaghan.
Yes.
And so had he given you the detail that appears in this paragraph, you might still have been able to record it in a fax in that.
Yes, it's possible that I did. I'm now able to say that I already had the information in a police statement, which was the exhibit referred to, although plainly I did not recall that earlier on the 30th of November, or I wouldn't have needed to talk to Mr O'Callaghan about it.
Yes. Or indeed when you prepared your statement for this hearing.
That's correct.
You say, or you proffer the proposition, a couple of paragraphs down of itself, none of this would seem to implicate Gulen, unless it could be said he saw something, had a duty to report and breached that duty.
Yes, on reflection, plainly if he saw something he would have had a duty. Of course he would have.
Yes, of course he would have. Yeah. So just so we all understand, the information you had was that he had seen something. Is that right?
No, the information I had was that Mr. Redacted had given a statement to the police saying that he had, but the other information that I had was that at the time that that had been alleged in the ID proceeding, I had somehow become aware, probably by talking to Father Gulen, that he absolutely denied the allegation.
And Mr. Leader, those representing you advised of your wish to amend your statement on this question, in other words, of whether it was knowledge you acquired from Mr. O'Callaghan or whether it was just recollection that you acquired after Mr. O'Callaghan had given evidence on this point, is it not?
Yes, the amendment that I have sought to make is that in paragraph 115 I had initially said that initially I did not know the details of the history or relationship between O'Donnell and Father Gulen, but I now realise that that must have been incorrect because I had knowledge from the ID proceeding, which I had forgotten when preparing this statement.
Yes.
What I mean to say is at the time that I was preparing the defences in the Foster's litigation, I had knowledge from some 6 years previously.
And it was listening to Mr. O'Callaghan's evidence that when that occurred to you?
It was not so much listening to Mr. O'Callaghan's evidence as reflecting on the diary note, I think.
Your Honour, would that be a convenient time?
Yes, we'll take lunch.